The wind tore across the empty Wyoming plains, sharp as broken glass, carrying the smell of snow that had not yet fallen. Jack Carter pulled his rough coat tighter and studied the land that belonged to him alone. At 24, he had scraped together 300 acres. Every inch wrestled from stubborn soil. The sun slid low, throwing gold and rust across the sky. Below, his cattle gathered by the creek, steam curling from their nostrils. He counted again, lips moving. 43, same as morning. A thin herd, but it was his, built from nothing after fever had taken his parents 5 years earlier. From them, he had learned wariness and silence, lessons carved deep. His father's voice still lived in his head, telling him to keep to himself, to trust no one. His mother, gentle even as she lay dying, had whispered that this world punished anyone who felt too much. Jack had believed her. In all the years since, he had spoken to no one beyond what ranch work demanded. Folks in town called him a hermit. He let them. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This story gets much more intense, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. The afternoon sky turned restless. Dark clouds rolled from the north faster than they should. Jack felt the change in the air, the way birds vanished, and stillness settled heavy. He had seen this before, a blizzard waiting to spring. He swung into the saddle on Belle, his steady mare, and urged her toward the herd. If he could drive them into the East Valley, maybe they would be spared the worst. But the temperature sank as if the earth had opened. His breath froze in his beard. Snow began, big, wet flakes that hardened to needles, driven sideways by a wild wind. Within minutes the world became a sheet of white. He could not see Belle's ears. He realized, too late, that this was no passing squall. It was the kind that froze cattle where they stood and buried men's steps from their own doors. He turned Belle, searching for the ranch house, but distance meant nothing inside the storm. Snow erased the horizon, the sky, even the ground. Belle stumbled, fighting drifts that seemed to rise from nowhere. Jack's hands went numb inside his gloves. Ice clung to his lashes until his eyes barely opened. Just as fear began to crush his chest, Belle halted sharply. Through the swirling snow, a faint orange shimmer flickered. Fire. His frozen mind needed a moment to believe it. Fire meant people, and people meant shelter. He slid from the saddle, keeping one hand on Belle's reins, and staggered toward the light. A small shape appeared near a rock wall, almost hidden under the storm's fury. It was a cone of hides, smoke curling from its peak. A tipi. He hesitated. His father's warnings about trusting outsiders rose up, but the cold had already cut through him like a blade. Pride was no use against death. He pulled aside the flap with clumsy fingers and called out, voice cracking, "Hello? Sorry to trouble you. I'm caught in the storm." The hide shifted. A young woman looked out, dark eyes quick with caution. Another, a little older, straightened near a fire behind her. Both wore soft leather stitched with beads that caught the glow. They stared at the stranger dripping snow on their threshold. Jack saw the older woman's hand slide toward a knife at her belt. He raised empty hands. "Please, my horse and I are lost. I mean no harm." The younger glanced at her sister, words passing low between them. At last she spoke in careful English. "Come, bring horse." Relief nearly buckled his knees. Together they pulled Belle to the lee side, tying her where the wind could do less damage. Inside, warmth struck him like a punch. Firelight threw shadows on hides, and robes spread thick around the flames. The place smelled of smoke and something sharp. Tea, maybe. Jack sank near the fire, too exhausted for manners. "I'm Jack," he managed, shaking snow from his hair. "My ranch is south, I think." "I'm Emily," said the younger woman. "This is my sister, Grace." She smiled faintly at his surprise. "Mission school gave us names easier for white tongues." Grace handed him a steaming cup. The clay burned his fingers, but he clung to it, letting heat crawl into his bones. The drink was strong and earthy, with a pine aftertaste. "Medicine tea," Emily explained. "Warms you inside." As blood returned to his fingers, pain flared sharp, and Grace spoke at last, her voice steady. "Pain is good. Means not frozen." They moved around him quietly, hanging his coat, setting a blanket across his shoulders. Their calm unsettled him. Everything he had been taught claimed people like them were dangerous. Yet here they were, offering life to a man who had shown up armed at their door. "Why?" he blurted. "Why help me?" Emily met his eyes across the flames. "Storm does not care who you are. Cold kills everyone. We know what it means to need shelter." The blizzard roared outside, shaking the walls, but inside the fire burned steady. For the first time in years, Jack felt the edge of loneliness soften. Morning came gray and quiet, as if the storm had stolen the sound from the world. Jack woke slowly, wrapped in the heavy warmth of borrowed robes. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. Then the smell of smoke and leather returned him to the memory of firelight and two steady faces. Emily sat near the doorway, working a strip of beadwork. Her fingers moved quick and sure, tiny colors catching the pale light. Grace was gone, maybe outside. Jack pushed himself upright, his body stiff from sleeping on the packed earth. The buffalo hides had been softer than they looked, but still his back ached. "Storm's over?" he asked, his voice rough. Emily looked up and nodded. "Sky is clear. Your horse is safe." She motioned toward a pot balanced over embers. "Eat first. Cold right ahead." He joined her near the coals, accepting a wooden bowl filled with thick porridge that smelled of sage and onions. His stomach answered before he tasted it. The first spoonful was hearty and warm, little bits of rabbit mixed in. "That's good," he said, surprised. "Thank you." A shy smile touched her mouth. "White men don't always like our food." "White men don't know much," Jack said without thinking, then flushed. She laughed softly, the sound light after the heavy night. Grace stepped inside, arms full of dry wood, snow dusting her dark braid. She spoke in their language, eyes moving from Jack to Emily. Emily answered, and Grace's brows lifted with quiet amusement. "What?" Jack asked, wary. Emily's eyes danced. "She says you look less like frozen rabbit today. More like nervous deer." Jack almost laughed. "Nervous deer fits." Grace stacked the wood and came closer. She was older than he'd thought, lines around her eyes that came from sun and wind. "No woman waits for you?" she asked, blunt. Jack shook his head, embarrassed. "No, no one wonders where I am most days." The sisters exchanged another look, the kind that said more than words. Emily set aside her beads and stood. "Come, we show you something." Outside, the world had turned pure white. Snow lay smooth over everything, sparkling under a pale sun. Jack followed them, amazed at how carefully they had chosen their shelter. The teepee sat in the lee of rocks, angled from the north wind, close to a spring that trickled under thin ice. This was no passing camp. It was a home. "You build all this?" he asked. "Women build," Grace said with quiet pride. "Men hunt, fight. Women make life happen." She pointed toward a stash of food tucked behind stones, hidden from animals. Emily knelt near patches of herbs, still poking through snow. "This for fever," she said, brushing a leaf. "That one for cuts. This keeps meat good." Jack crouched beside her, fascinated. "My mother knew plants, but not like this. How do you remember it all?" "Mother to daughter," Emily said. "Grandmother before her. Mission school tried to teach us to forget." She tapped her temple. "Some things stay." They were circling back when Grace suddenly froze. Her gaze swept the open snowfield. Emily's hand slid to the knife at her belt. Jack followed their eyes and spotted 3 riders far off, working through drifts. Inside, Grace said, sharp, but Jack had already recognized the yellow slicker on the lead horse. "That's Bill Harper. Owns the spread north of mine. They're looking for anyone caught in the storm." The sisters hesitated, reading his face. Their tension didn't ease. Jack understood. 3 white men finding 2 native women alone could turn ugly fast. "I'll speak to them," he said quietly. "If I stand here, they won't think trouble." Grace's eyes were wary, but Emily nodded. "We trust you." The words settled heavy in his chest. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had trusted him with something that mattered. The riders came slow, horses struggling through snow. Bill raised a hand. "Jack Carter. Thought you were a snow statue." "Close enough," Jack called back, stepping clear of the teepee before they reached it. found shelter just in time. Ryan Harper's gaze slid to the hides and then to the sisters standing near the doorway. "Well, look here," he drawled. "Company. They gave me cover," Jack said firmly. "I owe them my life." Clay, the third man, spat into the snow. "Looks like runaways from the res. Ought to be turned in." Jack kept his voice even. Storm didn't care about lines. Neither did their kindness. Bill's eyes narrowed, weighing things. "Law says plenty," Jack cut in, more sharply than planned. "But a man freezing in a blizzard's just a man. They saved me. That counts." Ryan smirked. "Since when do you care about anyone, Jack? Folks say you'd rather talk to cows." Anger flared hot, new and strange. Before Jack could speak, Emily stepped forward, her voice clear. "We gave help. Fed him, warmed him. That is all." Clay sneered. "Nobody asked you, girl." "I'm asking," Jack said, surprising himself with the steel in his tone. "Move along. Nothing here for you." For a heartbeat, the air felt like thin glass, ready to shatter. Bill studied Jack with eyes narrowed against the sun. The wind tugged at his coat, as if urging him to decide. Behind him, Ryan shifted in his saddle, hungry for trouble. Clay's hand hovered close to his rifle. Jack felt his own pulse in his throat, but forced himself to stay calm. Violence would ruin everything. After a long moment, Bill sighed. "Hell, I don't see anything here but snow," he said, slow and deliberate. "You boys." Ryan looked ready to argue, but his father's stare froze him. Clay scowled and spat again, but didn't speak. "That's what I thought," Bill added. "Let's check the southern pastures." The three turned their horses, Bill glancing back once. "Take care, Jack. Some fights don't end clean." When they disappeared over the ridge, Jack realized his hands were shaking. He turned toward the teepee. Emily and Grace were still by the doorway, their bodies tense but steady. Emily's dark eyes held quiet gratitude. Grace looked at him differently now, measuring, maybe. "Why risk yourself?" Grace asked when he came close. Her voice was neither soft nor hard, just curious. Jack rubbed the back of his neck, searching for words. "Because it was right," he said simply. "Because you trusted me." Emily's face warmed with a smile that touched places inside him he'd thought frozen. "Come," she said gently. "Tea is ready." Inside, the calm felt fragile, like a bubble that might burst. Grace poured the tea, her movements precise. Emily sat near Jack, closer than before, the scent of smoke clinging to her hair. Grace spoke first, her tone even. "You should leave soon. Check your herd before more men come." He knew she was right, yet the thought of leaving weighed heavier than sense. Their shelter, their presence, had given him more life in a single night than years alone on the ranch. He hesitated, then gathered courage. "Could I come back?" he asked quietly. "Bring food? Maybe repay what you've done." The sisters shared a look that said more than words. Emily's gaze softened. "You know where to find us," she said, but her voice carried a warning. "Danger walks close. For you. For us." "Understand," Jack said. And he did. His visits could cost them everything: reputation, safety, maybe their lives. Still, something inside him refused to let the moment end without promise. Grace surprised him by laying a hand on his sleeve. Her touch was firm but kind. "Lonely dear," she murmured. "Maybe not so lonely now." Jack saddled Belle slowly, reluctant to step back into the cold. Emily walked with him to the edge of the clearing. Snow gleamed bright under a washed sky. She paused, her face open and serious. "That night changed you," she said. He searched her eyes. "It wasn't just the night," he answered. "It was you." Color rose in her cheeks, but she didn't look away. "Morning now," she said softly. "New start, maybe." Jack nodded, the words sinking deep. He mounted Belle and turned toward home. At the ridge, he looked back. The two sisters stood side by side, dark against the white world, watching. He raised a hand. They lifted theirs in answer, small but sure. The ride home felt shorter, though the air still bit his face. The ranch came into view, lonely as always, yet not as final as before. He unsaddled Belle, rubbed her down, and went inside. The room seemed too quiet after the warmth he'd left. He poured himself coffee, sat at the table his father had built, and stared at the steam curling upward. 3 days passed. He lost 4 cattle to the blizzard, frozen stiff where they'd bunched for shelter. It hurt, but not like he'd expected. His thoughts kept drifting back to the teepee, to hands offering tea, to eyes meeting his across the fire. "What's gotten into you?" he muttered to the empty room. By afternoon, he'd made a decision. He loaded Belle with flour, coffee, salt, a haunch of venison from a deer he'd taken. At the last moment, he tucked a small packet of sugar into his pack. Maybe Emily had never tasted sweet coffee. The idea made him smile despite himself. The snow had hardened into a crust, making the trip easier. When the rocky outcrop finally appeared, relief hit so strong he had to steady himself in the saddle. The teepee stood just as before, smoke rising lazily. Emily stepped out, shawl pulled around her shoulders. For a heartbeat, surprise flickered across her face, then something warmer. "You came back," she said. "I told you I would," Jack replied, suddenly awkward. He slid from Belle and lifted the pack. "Brought supplies." "For thanks." Grace emerged with a cleaned rabbit in hand, eyes cool but not unkind. She glanced at the bundle, then at Jack. "You risk much," she said quietly. "You risked more letting me in," he answered. They helped him unload, touching the sugar as if it were treasure. Jack saw then how little they had, and how much pride kept them from showing need. "Stay," Emily said as he turned to go. "Eat with us. Tell about your land." He hesitated only a moment. "If you're sure." Inside, the fire welcomed him like an old friend. The weeks slid into a rhythm Jack had never known before. He found reasons to ride north, sometimes 3 times in a week, sometimes 4, each trip carrying flour, beans, meat, or small comforts he thought they might need. At first, he told himself it was only to repay a debt. But the truth came quick. It wasn't the food he wanted to deliver. It was himself. It was the sound of voices that weren't his own echoing inside empty walls. It was seeing Emily's eyes light when she spotted him at the edge of the trees, or the way Grace softened just a fraction each time he returned safe. One afternoon, he arrived to find Emily alone, working beads in the firelight. She looked up as he ducked inside. "Grace checks traps," she explained, her voice steady but warm. He sat near her, close enough to feel the heat of the flames, but careful not to intrude. For a while they stayed quiet, the silence not heavy but alive. Jack found himself watching her fingers move. The tiny beads caught the glow, colors weaving into patterns he could not name. "You're different now," she said suddenly, without looking up. He blinked. "Different how?" Her lips curved into a small smile. Less like scared rabbit, more like, she searched for the word, a man finding his heart. Jack felt heat rise in his face. He had no answer, only the ache of truth inside his chest. Tentatively, he turned his palm upward. She hesitated, then placed her hand in his, small and calloused but gentle. A simple touch, yet it sent something alive rushing through him. He had never held a woman's hand before. He'd never known how much a hand could say without words. "I've never," he started, then stopped, ashamed of his own inexperience. "I know," Emily said softly, her eyes kind. "Is better this way. First time, heart feels everything." Jack swallowed hard. "I don't know what I'm doing with any of this. Good teaching keeps us alive," she murmured. "Bad teaching keeps us from living." She gave his hand a light squeeze. "You will learn which is which." Before he could speak again, Grace's footsteps crunched outside. Emily withdrew her hand calmly, as though nothing had passed between them. But something had. Jack felt it in the way his chest thudded long after. That night, riding home under sharp stars, he wrestled with the truth. He was falling for her. The quiet, steady, fearless girl who should have been his enemy by every law he'd been raised to follow. His father would spit at the thought. His neighbors would laugh, or worse. Yet none of that felt as real as the warmth of her fingers in his. Back at his cabin, he stared into the cracked mirror above the wash basin. His reflection startled him. His hair was ragged, his beard needed trimming, but what struck him most were his eyes. No longer dull. They glimmered with something dangerous and new. Hope. He pressed his hands against the sink and whispered to the empty room, "What are you doing?" The reflection gave him no answer. He knew only that tomorrow he would return. Days bled into nights, and winter thickened its hold. Snow piled heavy, but Jack no longer felt the bite as before. He laughed more, hummed when he worked, caught himself daydreaming while hauling water or fixing fence posts. Grace noticed too. "You smile now," she said one morning as they split firewood together. "Your mouth remembers." Emily teased him once, calling him nervous dear again, but this time with a spark in her eyes that made his chest ache with longing. Jack began learning their words, simple things like water, fire, friend. His tongue stumbled, earning their laughter, but Emily's patience made him try again and again. Sometimes she leaned close to correct him, her breath brushing his cheek, and he forgot the word entirely. One evening he brought a gift, a small hand mirror with a carved handle, bought in town after long hesitation. When he gave it to Emily, she held it as though it were fragile glass. "No one ever gave me a gift like this," she whispered. Grace, watching, smiled knowingly. Nervous deer grows brave. That night, as firelight flickered low, Emily spoke a phrase in her own language, melodic and strange. Jack frowned. "What does it mean?" She and Grace exchanged a glance. At last, Emily said, "When heart sees another heart, when souls say hello." Jack tried to repeat it, mangling the sounds, but Emily's smile softened. "Yes, like that." Later, as he rode away, Sarah stopped him with a hand on his arm. Her stern face had gentled. "You are a good man," she said quietly. "But this path, it is hard. My sister's heart is soft. Don't break it." "I won't," Jack said, his voice low, almost a vow. "Not ever." The wind howled across the snow, but for once it did not sound lonely. It sounded like promise. By February, snow still lay deep, but Jack no longer counted the days. Life in the valley had become part of him. He moved through the woods with care, always watching for other riders, always changing his path so no one could follow. The old line shack on his eastern border stood empty, but he rarely thought of it now. His real home felt closer to the hidden spring where Emily and Grace waited. One bright afternoon, Jack helped mend a tear in the teepee flap. His hands, once clumsy, now worked steady as he threaded thin leather through soft hide. Grace stood nearby, testing the repair with sharp eyes. "You learn fast," she said. "Soon you won't need teachers." Jack flushed, smiling without meaning to. Emily sat close, busy with beads, but stealing quiet looks at him. When their eyes met, something warm passed between them, so gentle it made him catch his breath. Later, Emily asked him to fetch water from a spring. They walked side by side through snow that squeaked under their boots. At the water's edge, ice lay thin over the dark pool. Emily knelt and cracked it with a stone. "You think much," she said without looking up. "Bad habit for man?" he asked, half teasing. "Sometimes good," she answered. "What do you think about?" Jack set the bucket down, heart beating fast. "Spring," he said. "When snow melts, you could stay near my land. There's an old cabin. No one uses it. It might be safer." Emily's dark eyes lifted, calm but serious. "Jack," she said softly, "we can't hide on white land. People will ask. Soldiers may come." "I don't care what they say," he blurted. "Yes, you do," she said, touching his cheek with fingers cold and light. "You care because you're wise. You know what would happen." He caught her hand, holding it a heartbeat longer than he should. "I care more about keeping you safe." "Safety is not hiding," she said gently. "Safety is moving like smoke, bending like grass. That is how we survive." They walked back in silence, but halfway, Emily slipped her hand into his. She didn't look at him, and he didn't speak, but the small warmth between them said everything. That evening, Grace told a story about Emily's childhood. "She once chased a skunk," Grace said, grinning. "Smelled bad for weeks. No boy came near." Emily tried to hide a smile, as Jack laughed harder than he had in years. The sound startled him. It had been so long since laughter came easy. As sunset faded, Jack saddled Belle, preparing to leave. Emily followed him to the pines where the mare waited. Her face was thoughtful, the wind catching strands of her dark hair. "Stay tonight," she said quietly. Jack froze. Mary, he began, then stopped, using her old name by mistake. Emily, I don't want you to think. Her cheeks colored. Not for that, she said quickly. Stay so you see morning with us. He thought of his empty cabin, the long dark, the cold bed. He thought of Bill Harper's warning about trouble. Then he looked at Emily, steady and sure despite the blush on her face. Yes, he said at last. I'll stay. That night, the three of them shared food and stories. Grace showed him a game with stones and marks he could never quite follow. White men think too much, she teased. Not enough feeling. Emily taught him to string beads. His fingers were clumsy, but she laughed softly, guiding him. After a while, Grace curled up near the fire, pretending to sleep. Jack and Emily kept talking in low voices. She spoke of her mother's songs, of summer hunts, of nights under open sky before soldiers pushed them away. Jack spoke of his mother's stubborn garden, of how she made beauty grow even in hard ground. She would have liked you, he said before he could stop himself. Emily looked at him, her face gentle. I would have liked her too, she whispered. When they finally slept, it was on opposite sides of the fire, proper and careful. But Jack had never felt closer to another soul. In the night, he woke once, finding Emily awake, watching the coals. Her voice was a whisper. Sleep. You're safe here. For the first time in years, he believed it. Jack woke to soft dripping from the trees. The sun was pale, and the air felt almost warm compared to the sharp cold of weeks past. Patches of earth showed through melting snow. Spring was coming. The thought should have made him glad, but a quiet heaviness sat in his chest. Spring meant movement. Emily and Grace might leave. They were already awake. Grace was tending the fire, stirring a pot that smelled of sweet herbs. Emily sat close, brushing her long braid. She looked up and smiled when Jack stirred, but there was worry behind it. He pulled on his boots and joined them. Snow is going, Emily said. Soon the valley will open. Jack nodded, eyes on the flames. You'll be gone, he said, not meaning to sound so rough. Grace set the spoon aside. We move when grass turns green, she said gently. Maybe north, maybe west, always away from more people. Jack stared at the fire. I could keep you safe, he said quietly. That old cabin near my east fence. No one goes there. Grace shook her head. Your place is watched. Men ride by, talking. You bring us there. We become a reason for them to harm you. Emily's hand rested lightly on Jack's arm. We don't want that for you. He looked up at her, feeling the weight of all the years he'd spent alone pressing against this fragile, bright thing they'd built. I don't want you gone, he said. The words felt raw, pulled from somewhere deep. For a long moment, Emily said nothing. She studied him with calm, serious eyes. Then she leaned close enough for him to see the tiny freckles across her nose. Sometimes hearts know fast, she said softly, but minds take longer to catch. Grace gave a small smile, almost a sigh. Young hearts, she muttered, always running ahead. Emily laughed, and even Grace's stern face warmed. They spent the morning making quiet plans. Grace walked the ridges, checking for new tracks. Emily and Jack cleaned gear, patched clothes, prepared food. Work felt easy, like a song they all knew. When they paused for lunch, Emily poured tea, the steam curling between them. You could stay close, Jack said carefully. Not on my land, but near enough. There's a hollow 2 miles north, fresh water, cover from wind. You could build there. I could visit, help. Emily looked at Grace. Something unspoken passed between the sisters. Grace nodded slowly. Maybe, she said at last. Not hiding, but choosing where to stand. Emily's fingers brushed Jack's wrist as she passed him a cup. We will see where the path leads. A lightness settled over Jack then, fragile but real, like ice breaking under early sun. For the first time, their future felt less like a dream and more like a thing they could reach. That afternoon, they shared stories while preparing venison for drying. Grace told of summers before soldiers drove their band away, of swimming in rivers and racing horses through grass high as their waists. Emily spoke of a friend she'd lost at the mission school, her voice soft but steady. Jack, in turn, talked about his father's strict rules, about how silence had been his only company after his parents died. He felt his chest loosen as words came, as if some locked door inside him had opened. As dusk neared, Jack gathered Belle from the trees. He didn't want to leave, but he forced himself. Emily walked with him through the pines. The air smelled of wet earth, of a world waking up. At the edge of the clearing, she stopped. "Jack," she said, eyes dark in the fading light. "We are not just part of Storm anymore. This is real now." He reached for her hand, holding it between both of his. "I know," he said. "I want it to be real." Her smile was small but steady. "Then you must be strong. People will talk. Some will hate. We will need courage." He nodded, heart pounding. "I'll stand with you. Whatever comes." Grace called from behind them, teasing, "Don't let the deer faint on the way home." Emily laughed, soft as falling snow. Jack grinned despite the ache in his chest. The ride back was slow. Night spread across the hills, stars sharp above. Jack felt alive in a way he had never known, but also aware of the risk pressing close around them. Still, the warmth of Emily's hand lingered, guiding him through the dark. Snow still clung to the shaded hills, but patches of brown grass were showing through. Jack rode into town for supplies, hoping to be quick. The streets of Cedar Falls were slushy, horses tied outside the saloon. He went to the general store first, buying coffee, salt, and nails, then stepped back into the chilly air. A voice drifted from the saloon door. "Army's riding next week," someone said. "Looking for strays north of the river." Jack stopped, pulse jumping. Another voice answered, rough with drink. "About time. Heard there's camp smoke near Carter's Spread." Jack forced himself to walk on, slow and easy, though heat rose in his chest. He tied Belle, pushed through the saloon door, and found a corner seat. Men talked loud over whiskey, swapping news. Bill Harper sat at the bar, looking tired. Ryan leaned beside him, bragging. Clay nursed a drink, mean eyes sharp. Storm flushed out more than cattle, Clay said. "Bet there's redskins hiding up that valley." Ryan grinned. Maybe Jack Carter's got himself company. Bill gave his son a hard look. "Enough." Jack finished his drink without hurrying. He left as though nothing mattered, but once out of sight, he swung onto Belle and drove her hard toward the hills. The thought of Emily and Grace caught in a sweep turned his stomach cold. He found them near the spring. Emily was washing clothes. Grace sat sewing leather near their shelter. Both looked up at his fast approach. Emily's smile vanished at his face. "Trouble," Jack said, sliding off Belle. "Army's coming. Clay's been talking." Grace stood, eyes narrowing. "We knew this might come." "You need to leave tonight," Jack urged. "Head for the mountains, or—" Emily's voice stopped him. "No more running," she said, quiet but firm. Water dripped from her hands. "We are tired of being smoke." "Emily, please," Jack said. "This isn't pride. It's life or death." Grace stepped closer, calm and steady. "Living is more than breathing," she said. "We can't spend forever running for shadows." Jack looked from one to the other, torn between fear and something stronger. "If you stay, they'll find you," he said hoarsely. "Maybe," Emily replied. She reached for his hands, her fingers small but sure. "But maybe we prepare instead. We have friends." Jack blinked. "Friends?" Grace gave a faint smile. "Ruth Miller knows. She found our tracks weeks ago." Emily nodded. "Louise, Mrs. Chun. They see more than most." Jack sat heavily on a rock, the world tilting. He had thought their secret fragile and small, but it turned out a quiet web of allies had been weaving itself around them. "How many?" he asked. "Enough," Grace said. "Not many, but enough to stand." Jack met Emily's eyes and saw strength there, quiet but fierce. "I'll stand with you," he said. "Always. But I'm scared." Emily knelt beside him, taking his face in her hands. "Fear is smart," she whispered. "Fear that stops living is poison. We won't drink it." They spent the day shaping plans. The rocks above the valley made good cover. Paths led out through hidden cuts if things turned bad. Jack would keep up his chores, ride into town when needed, and act as though nothing had changed. As shadows grew long, they built a small fire. Grace checked her rifle with patient hands. Emily sat close to Jack, sewing a tear in his coat while the flames threw soft light over her face. He watched her fingers work, steady despite the storm coming toward them. Whatever happens, Jack began. Emily touched his lips lightly with her fingers. Not tonight, she said. Then, after a pause, she leaned in and kissed him, soft and sure. It was her first. Warmth ran through him, mingling with a rush of fear and joy so deep it almost hurt. When they pulled apart, her eyes shone. Now you have reason to be careful, she said. Jack held that look as long as he dared. Tomorrow would bring risk. But tonight, sitting between the sisters, the fire glowing, he felt something he had almost given up on, a life worth fighting for. Morning came bright, the sky washed clean by rain during the night. Jack sat on a rock above the clearing, watching mist lift from the valley floor. Emily and Grace were packing quietly below, laying out food, rifles, and blankets with careful hands. The army patrol would pass sometime today. Whether they searched or only rode by, none of them knew. He felt calm, more than he expected. The weeks here had given him something his lonely cabin never could, a sense that he belonged somewhere, not because of land or name, but because hearts had chosen to meet him halfway. When Emily climbed up to join him, she carried 2 mugs of tea. She handed him one, her smile faint but steady. You're thinking again, she teased. Trying not to, Jack said, wrapping cold fingers around the warm cup. Just don't want to lose this. Emily sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. No one can take what's already inside you, she said. Even if we have to leave, what we made stays. Grace called from below, checking bell saddle. If soldiers ride through, we speak plain, she said. If they turn ugly, we vanish up the ridge. Jack looked down at the 2 women, their faces calm, their movements sure. They were not helpless at all. They were strong, carrying history inside them like a map. He felt proud just standing with them. Hoofbeats broke the quiet. 3 riders appeared at the far end of the valley. Jack rose, heart steady now. He led Belle forward, keeping himself between the sisters and the patrol. The soldiers slowed when they saw him. Mornin', the lead man called. You Carter? Yes, Jack answered easily. Checking my fences. The soldier's gaze slid toward the tipi, but didn't linger. Maybe he saw nothing. Maybe he decided not to. He nodded and moved on, the others following. Soon the sound of hooves faded, leaving only wind and birdsong. Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Emily stepped to his side, slipping her hand into his. Grace allowed herself the smallest smile. For now, safe, she said. They ate a quiet meal together. Later, Grace packed for a scouting trip east. She clasped Jack's shoulder before leaving. Careful, nervous dear, she said, a hint of warmth in her voice. Jack and Emily stayed by the fire as afternoon light spilled across the valley. They spoke of small things, a bird's nest in the pines, herbs sprouting near the spring, how the air already smelled of new grass. For once, the future felt wide, not like a trap, but like open sky. As evening settled, Jack helped Emily hang a fresh pot above the flames. She watched him with soft eyes. Storm brought you here, she said quietly. But you chose to stay. That choice is everything. He touched her cheek, gentle. You taught me to live, he said, not just to survive. Emily leaned into his hand, her face peaceful. Then we both learned. They sat together as stars pricked the sky, letting silence speak. The valley around them felt alive, a place built not on fear, but on trust, care, and courage. Jack thought of the man he'd been before that blizzard, cold, shut away, believing the world was only loss waiting to happen. Now he knew better. Love, friendship, kindness, they were risks, yes, but also the reason life had color at all. He tightened his arm around Emily, holding her close. Whatever roads lay ahead, whatever storms or voices tried to tear them apart, he understood the truth the winter had given him. A life lived hiding is no life at all. To reach for others, to stand when it matters, is how people turn lonely ground into home.